was worth. A single dad who worked with his hands, who fixed things for a living, who measured his success in sawdust and school pickups rather than corner offices and quarterly bonuses. She glanced at her wine glass, then back at him, and let the words slip out like it cost her nothing at all. Weak. Connor didn't flinch at the insult. He simply checked his watch, thinking of Ivy waiting at home with the babysitter, and wondered how much longer basic politeness required him to stay at this table. Outside the window of the restaurant, a man in a wrinkled coat stood on the sidewalk, staring at the front door with an intensity that made passing pedestrians cross to the other side of the street, and something in the air shifted without anyone inside noticing. The restaurant was called Maple and Stone, a converted general store in the old part of Ashford, Connecticut, where exposed brick walls held up a century of small-town history and quiet memory. Edison bulbs hung from oxidized copper pipes, casting warm pools of amber light across reclaimed wood tables that still bore the scratches and stains of their previous lives. It was the kind of place that tried hard to feel effortless, to suggest that beauty and atmosphere could exist without striving or pretension. Melanie had chosen it naturally. She had strong opinions about restaurants the way some people had opinions about politics, unshakable and delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who had never been seriously challenged on anything that mattered to her sense of self. Connor had arrived first, as he always did for any appointment or meeting. Punctuality was a habit he couldn't break, drilled into him during years of work, where being late meant someone didn't get help in time, where minutes could mean the difference between a crisis averted and a tragedy unfolding. He had chosen a table near the back of the room, close to the kitchen door with a clear sightline to the main entrance. These choices were automatic now, instinctive, made without conscious thought or deliberation. He no longer worked in crisis response, hadn't for several years, but the training had settled into his bones like calcium, becoming part of the invisible structure that held him upright in the world. Melanie had swept in 12 minutes late, entirely unapologetic, trailing the scent of expensive perfume and the particular energy of someone who genuinely believed the world adjusted its schedule around her convenience. She was attractive in a polished, precise way, her blonde hair cut in sharp geometric angles, her makeup applied with architectural precision. Everything about her suggested control and deliberate choice, from the tailored cut of her silk blouse to the exact positioning of her rings on fingers that had clearly never known manual labor or calluses. Now, 40 minutes into the evening, Connor understood why his sister-in-law, Sarah, had been deliberately vague about Melanie's personality when setting up this blind date. The woman hadn't stopped talking since the breadbasket arrived, and most of her words had been variations on a single theme that apparently fascinated her endlessly: her own accomplishments, her own importance, her own undeniable success in the corporate world she inhabited. "So you just build things?" Melanie asked, the question arriving like a verdict already rendered. Her fork hovered over her arugula salad, forgotten in the midst of what she clearly considered a fascinating archaeological excavation into the mystery of his inadequacy and lack of ambition. Cabinets, mostly custom furniture, sometimes whatever people need and are willing to pay fairly for. And that's enough for you? Just working with your hands all day, coming home covered in wood shavings? Connor took a measured sip of his water, letting the cool liquid buy him a moment of patience he wasn't sure he possessed naturally. He thought about his workshop behind the house, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil that greeted him every morning like an old friend welcoming him home. He thought about the way a well-joined corner felt under his fingers, tight and true, the wood grain flowing unbroken around the angle, as if it had always been meant to turn that way. He thought about Ivy sitting on her little stool in the corner of the shop, tongue poking out in concentration as she drew pictures of horses and houses. And sometimes, when she was feeling particularly generous, pictures of him surrounded by his tools. "It's honest work," he said finally, "and it lets me be home when my daughter needs me. That matters more than anything else I could be doing." Maylene's expression flickered through several emotions in quick succession, none of them flattering to her character or suggesting any depth of understanding. Pity arrived first, the kind reserved for people who had clearly failed to grasp how the world really worked. Then came something that looked uncomfortably like contempt, sharp and undisguised. Finally, her face settled into a kind of bemused condescension, the expression of someone dealing with a particularly slow student who simply couldn't grasp the obvious truth being explained to them. That's very noble, I suppose, in a simple, limited sort of way. Connor didn't respond to the provocation. Long ago, he had learned that some conversations weren't worth having, that some people spoke not to communicate or connect, but to establish hierarchy, to position themselves above others through the careful deployment of words as weapons. Maylene was building a tower with every sentence she spoke, and she wanted him to acknowledge how impressively high she had climbed. He saw no reason to compete for ground he had no interest in occupying or defending. From the kitchen came a sudden crash that cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant, plates hitting tile, the sharp percussion of porcelain shattering against hard flooring. A voice raised in frustration, quickly stifled by someone with the presence of mind to remember there were customers who might hear the disruption. The other diners glanced toward the sound with the reflexive irritation of people whose pleasant evenings had been briefly disturbed, then returned to their meals with determined focus on their own conversations. But Connor's attention lingered on the kitchen door, on the way it swung open to release a server whose face had gone pale beneath her professional smile. The server was young, maybe 22 or 23, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that was starting to come loose from its elastic band. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a water pitcher on a nearby table, liquid sloshing over the rim onto the white tablecloth in a spreading stain she couldn't hide. She apologized profusely to the startled diners, dabbing at the spill with a cloth napkin, but her eyes kept darting toward the front door with an anxiety that had absolutely nothing to do with spilled water or upset customers. "Honestly," Maylene observed, watching the scene with distaste that bordered on genuine disgust, "you'd think a place with this reputation could hire competent staff. This restaurant was supposed to be good." Connor didn't answer her complaint. He was watching the server move to another table, noting the jerky, disconnected quality of her movements, the way she flinched visibly when the kitchen door banged open behind her with a gust of steam and noise. Something had happened back there in the kitchen, or perhaps something was happening right now in the dining room that he hadn't yet fully identified or understood. Something had shaken her badly enough that she couldn't hide it, despite her obvious professional efforts to appear normal and composed. He shifted in his chair, angling his body slightly to give himself a better view of both the main entrance and the kitchen door simultaneously. It was an unconscious movement, muscle memory from years of professional training and difficult field experience. But he caught himself doing it and felt a flicker of something like embarrassment at the old habits, reasserting themselves unbidden. He wasn't that person anymore. He was a carpenter now, a father, a man who built bookshelves and rocking chairs and let other people handle the crises of the world. The front door of the restaurant opened, letting in a gust of October air that carried the smell of fallen leaves. The man who stepped inside was perhaps 50 years old, with thinning gray hair that hadn't been washed recently, and a face that looked like it hadn't seen restful sleep in many days. His clothes were wrinkled and mismatched, his winter coat hanging open despite the winter chill outside, and he moved with the unsteady gait of someone fighting hard to hold himself together against forces that wanted to tear him apart from the inside. Not drunk, Connor assessed automatically, the old training kicking in before he could consciously stop it. Something else entirely, something that lived deeper than alcohol, in the places where desperation and isolation grew roots and flourished in darkness. The man stood in the entrance for a long moment, scanning the dining room with eyes that were too bright, too intensely focused, searching for something or someone with an urgency that sent ripples of unease through the diners nearest the door. Conversations faltered and died mid-sentence. Forks paused midway to mouths. The comfortable ambient hum of a Thursday evening dinner service began to develop cracks that spread like ice breaking on a warming spring pond. Connor's hand moved to his water glass. He lifted it slowly, using the casual motion to mask the way his entire body had shifted into a different mode of awareness. Every sense sharpening, every muscle preparing for possibilities he genuinely hoped wouldn't materialize tonight. Across the table, Mylene was still talking, her voice a distant murmur beneath the sudden focusing of his attention. She was saying something about European travel destinations, about the cultural limitations of American vacation spots and resorts, but the words slid past him without making contact or leaving any impression on his consciousness. He was counting exits now, 2 visible from his position. The front door, currently occupied by the agitated stranger, blocking the most obvious escape route, a service entrance through the kitchen, assuming it wasn't blocked or locked from the outside. He was counting people automatically. 23 diners at 11 tables scattered around the room, 4 visible staff members, including the frightened young server. Too many people in too small a space with too few ways out if things went wrong in the next few minutes. The stranger shuffled away from the entrance and toward the bar, muttering words that the bartender couldn't quite make out from his position behind the polished wood counter. The stranger's hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and they stayed there, hidden from view, and that single detail lodged in Connor's awareness, like a splinter working its way towards somewhere vital and dangerous. "You're not even listening to me," Mylene said, irritation sharpening her voice to a fine cutting edge. "I was asking about your travel experiences. Have you seen anything beyond this little corner of Connecticut, or is this small town the entire extent of your world and ambitions?" Connor pulled part of his attention back to her face, but only the smallest part necessary for basic social function and politeness. Most of his awareness remained fixed on the stranger's reflection in the window behind Mylene's head, tracking the man's erratic, unpredictable progress through the restaurant. "I've seen enough of the world," he said, keeping his voice neutral and calm. That's exactly what someone who hasn't seen anything would say to justify their limitations. The stranger had left the bar area now, wandering through the restaurant with an aimless purposefulness that set Connor's teeth on edge and raised the hair on the back of his neck. The man moved between tables like a sleepwalker, not quite present in the room, but not quite absent either, searching for something only he could perceive or understand. Diners leaned away from him as he passed too close to their tables, their discomfort manifesting in averted eyes and hunched shoulders and conversations that died to uncomfortable whispers. No one said anything directly to him or asked him to leave. No one wanted to be the person who acknowledged the elephant stumbling through their pleasant evening. Near the window, a young couple sat with their toddler secured in a wooden high chair. The little girl was maybe 3 years old, with curly brown hair escaping from lopsided pigtails and a yellow dress that matched the crayon she was using to draw on a paper plasmat. The father had noticed the stranger's wandering approach, and his body language shifted dramatically, becoming protective and uncertain simultaneously. He pulled his own chair closer to his wife's position, creating a barrier of muscle and paternal intention between the strange mumbling man and his precious family. The stranger stopped walking. He was standing right beside the young family's table now, swaying slightly on his feet, his muttering growing louder but still not quite intelligible from Connor's position across the room. Connor set down his water glass with careful deliberation, making no sudden movements. His mind was running calculations that he hadn't consciously initiated, assessing distances and angles and possibilities with the speed of long practice and training. 8 feet from his current position to where the stranger stood, swaying, 12 feet to the young couple with their child in the high chair. The wooden chair he was sitting in weighed roughly 15 pounds and could be lifted and repositioned in one fluid motion if necessary. The table could be flipped onto its side to create a barrier if the situation absolutely demanded it. These were thoughts he hadn't needed in years. strategies and tactics he had deliberately buried beneath sawdust and bedtime stories and the quiet rhythms of a smaller, safer life. But they were still there inside him, sharp and ready as ever, waiting to be called upon. "I need to use the restroom," Malign announced, pushing back from the table with the casual confidence of someone who had never once in her entire privileged life worried about her physical safety in a public space. "Try not to fall asleep while I'm gone." Connor almost stopped her from leaving the relative safety of their table. The words of warning were right there on his tongue, a quiet instruction to stay seated, to wait, to let him understand what was happening before anyone made unnecessary movements that might trigger something unpredictable. But the stranger hadn't actually done anything yet, not really. He was just a disheveled, distressed man standing too close to a family, muttering to himself about things no one else could hear or understand. That wasn't a crime. It wasn't even particularly unusual in a world full of people carrying invisible wounds and private suffering and unaddressed mental health crises. To raise an alarm now would be to invite mockery and dismissal, to confirm every shallow assumption Malign had already made about his limitations and anxieties. He let her go, watching her walk away toward the hallway that led to the restrooms, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with the confident rhythm of someone who had never known real fear or vulnerability. The moment Malign disappeared from view around the corner, Connor was on his feet and moving. He crossed the dining room smoothly, casually, as if he had simply decided to stretch his legs or visit the bar for a different drink. His path took him toward the elderly couple, sitting 2 tables away from his own position, and he paused beside their table with an easy, unremarkable smile that suggested nothing was wrong. "Excuse me," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only they could hear him clearly over the ambient noise of the restaurant. "I'm so sorry to bother you folks, but I think you might have dropped something on your way in earlier tonight." He pretended to hand them an invisible object, using the small, deceptive gesture to lean close enough for a whispered conversation. "There's a gentleman near the window who seems to be having a very difficult time this evening. I'd like you to quietly finish up your meal and head toward the kitchen when you get a comfortable chance. There's a back exit through there that leads to the parking lot." The elderly woman's eyes widened with sudden understanding and alarm. Her husband started to turn his head toward the stranger by reflex. "Please don't look directly at him," Connor said, gently but firmly. "Just give me a small nod if you understand what I'm asking you to do." 2 small nods, nearly synchronized. Connor straightened up and moved smoothly to the next table, where a man in his 30s was dining alone with a laptop open beside his half-finished plate of pasta. Same quiet instruction, delivered in slightly different words, adjusted for the audience and situation. Same calm demeanor that suggested nothing was wrong while communicating that something very much was. Then the next table, and the next after that, working his way methodically through the restaurant. He moved like a host, circulating at a cocktail party, pleasant and unremarkable, never rushing, never showing urgency that might alert the stranger or trigger panic in the remaining diners behind him. As he moved and whispered and guided, the restaurant slowly began to empty, like a bathtub with the drain pulled open. Diners drifted toward the kitchen in 2s and 3s, their departures staggered carefully enough to seem natural and coincidental to anyone watching. A woman suddenly remembering an urgent phone call she needed to make outside. A man deciding he wanted to check on something in his car. A couple asking for their check and paying quickly in cash to avoid the delay of running a credit card. Ordinary movements, unremarkable exits, a gradual thinning of the crowd that wouldn't register as a coordinated evacuation unless someone was specifically watching for exactly that. The stranger near the window didn't notice any of it happening. He was too deep inside whatever storm was raging through his mind, his attention fixed on something only he could see or hear, memories or grievances or terrors that had nothing to do with the restaurant around him. The bartender had retreated to the far end of the bar, his phone pressed tightly to his ear, speaking in urgent whispers that Connor hoped were reaching the right people and bringing help quickly. Connor was helping a young woman in a blue dress gather her purse and coat, guiding her toward the kitchen exit with a reassuring hand on her elbow when the stranger finally erupted. The sound of his palm slamming flat against the polished wood of the bar top cracked through the restaurant like a gunshot in the enclosed space. Everyone who remained in the dining room froze in place, caught mid-motion like figures in a photograph, their bodies paralyzed by the ancient animal instinct that preceded conscious thought. Nobody leaves." The stranger's voice was raw and shredded, torn from some deep wound that had never properly healed. "Nobody moves. I've been trying to talk to people for months, and nobody ever wants to listen to a single word I say. So now you're all going to sit down and listen to me." Connor stepped smoothly in front of the young woman in the blue dress, placing his body as a shield between her and the stranger without making the protective gesture obvious or confrontational. His heart was hammering hard against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his system in a hot chemical rush, but his face remained calm, and his voice was steady and clear when he finally spoke, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Okay," he said, the single word carrying across the frozen silence. "We're listening. You have our complete attention now." The stranger's head snapped toward him with predatory speed. Those feather-bright eyes focused, narrowed, assessed this new variable in the situation. "Who the hell are you?" "Just a customer having dinner tonight. My name's Connor. What's yours?" "I didn't ask for your name. I asked who you are. What gives you the right to talk to me?" "Nobody special, I promise. Just someone who's willing to hear what you have to say. That's what you want, isn't it?" The stranger laughed at that, but there was no humor in the sound at all. It was fractured and desperate, the laugh of a man who had forgotten what genuine amusement felt like, who could only produce a broken imitation of the real thing. "Nobody listens. That's the whole goddamn problem with this world. I've been screaming for months, and nobody hears a single word I say." "I hear you now," Connor said, and he meant it.
"Completely. I'm right here, and I'm listening to every word." The dining room had gone absolutely still, every remaining person holding their breath. Somewhere behind Connor, toward the back of the room, a child began to cry. It was a thin, frightened wail, the sound of a toddler who didn't understand what was happening but could feel the fear radiating from every adult around her like heat from a fire. The young couple with the little girl in the yellow dress hadn't made it out in time. The father was holding his wife and daughter close against his body, his face a rigid mask of controlled terror, his muscles coiled with the desperate energy of a man calculating impossible odds and finding no good options. Connor kept his attention fixed on the stranger, but he was peripherally aware of everything happening around him. The crying child, the trembling server who had frozen beside the kitchen door, unable to move forward or back, the elderly couple who had almost reached the exit before the outburst stopped them in their tracks. 23 people in the room when this started. Maybe 12 still remained in danger. Still, too many variables, too many potential victims if things went sideways. "They took everything from me," the stranger said, and his voice cracked on the words like ice breaking under pressure. "My job, my house, my wife. 22 years I gave to that company. 22 years of my life, my best years, and they threw me away like I was nothing, like I was garbage, like I had never existed at all." Connor took a small step forward, not aggressive, not threatening, just marginally closer, reducing the distance between them by a foot or so. "That's not right," he said, his voice carrying genuine empathy. "Nobody should ever be treated that way, not after that kind of loyalty and dedication. You don't know anything about it. You can't possibly understand what it's like to lose everything you've worked your entire life for." "Then help me understand. Tell me what happened to you." Something in the stranger's rigid posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The volcanic rage that had propelled his outburst was still there, still dangerous and unpredictable, but beneath it Connor could now see the exhaustion and the grief, and something that looked almost like desperate hope for connection. "I was an engineer," the stranger said, and his voice changed when he spoke about his former profession, becoming softer, almost wondering. "I designed systems. Heating and cooling, ventilation, air quality management for commercial buildings. Good systems that worked properly and lasted for decades. I was good at my job. I was really good at it." "I believe you,"
Connor said, and he meant it completely. He could see the intelligence in the man's reddened eyes buried beneath the exhaustion and the desperation. This wasn't someone who had failed through lack of effort or ability. This was someone who had been discarded by a system that valued youth and cheapness over experience and loyalty. "My daughter won't talk to me anymore," the stranger continued, and now the words were spilling out like water through a crack in a dam, unstoppable once started. "Her name is Emily. She just turned 12 years old last month, and she looks at me now like I'm a stranger, like I'm someone she's embarrassed to even know or acknowledge." "What happened between you and Emily?" "I had a breakdown." The stranger's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, shame mixing with grief in equal measures. "After they fired me, after my wife decided she couldn't handle being married to a failure anymore and left me, after I lost the house we'd lived in for 15
years, I just couldn't hold it all together anymore. The pieces wouldn't stay in place no matter how hard I tried to keep everything from falling apart. They put me in a psychiatric hospital for 3 weeks, and when I finally got out, Emily wouldn't even look at me. My own daughter thinks her father is crazy, thinks I'm dangerous." Connor took another careful step forward. They were close now, close enough that he could see the individual threads of gray in the man's unkempt hair, the broken blood vessels mapping exhaustion across his eyes, the fine tremor in his hands that spoke of too little sleep and too much coffee, and too many nights spent staring at the ceiling while the darkness pressed down. "I have a daughter too," Connor said quietly, just loud enough for the stranger to hear. "Her name is Ivy. She's 7 years old, and there have been days, more than I like to admit, when I felt like I was failing her completely. Days when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back at me." The stranger's eyes searched Connor's face with desperate intensity, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden angle that everyone always seemed to have. Finding none of that, finding only honest recognition of shared pain and struggle, he seemed to deflate slightly, the rigid tension in his shoulders giving way to something more human and vulnerable. "How do you do it?" the stranger asked, his voice barely a whisper now. "How do you keep going when everything falls apart around you?" "One day at a time, sometimes 1 hour at a time, sometimes 1 minute at a time. When things get really bad and overwhelming, you focus on the next thing you can do, the smallest possible action, and you do that one thing. Then you focus on the thing after that. You don't let yourself think about the whole mountain you have to climb. You just think about the next single step in front of you." "I don't know what the next step is anymore. I can't see it right now in this moment. The next step is sitting down with me somewhere quiet and talking, just talking. No judgment, no pressure, no agenda, just two fathers comparing notes on how hard this whole thing is." The stranger stared at him for a long moment that stretched like taffy. Behind them, Connor could hear soft movement, people quietly edging toward the exits now that the stranger's attention was focused elsewhere. Good. The fewer people in the room, the fewer variables to manage, the less chance of someone getting hurt. "Why do you even care?" the stranger asked finally, suspicion and hope warring in his voice. "You don't know me at all. I'm nothing to you, just another crazy person ruining your dinner." "Because I've been where you are," Connor said simply. "Honestly, it took her 8 months from diagnosis to the end, and after she was gone, I spent 6 months wondering what the point of any of it was, wondering why I should bother getting out of bed each morning. The only thing that kept me from disappearing completely was Ivy, the knowledge that she needed me to be present even when I didn't feel like I deserved to be needed." Something fundamental shifted in the stranger's face. The last traces of his defensive anger crumbled away like a wall collapsing, leaving only the raw grief and loneliness beneath, exposed and vulnerable. "I just want Emily to look at me again," he whispered, and tears were starting to slide down his unshaven cheeks. "I just want my daughter to see that I'm still her dad, that I'm still the person who taught her to ride a bike and took her fishing and read her stories at bedtime." "Then you need to be there for her to see."
You need to be alive and present.
And working on getting better. You need to get help, real professional help, and show up every single day even when she won't look at you, especially when she won't look at you. Because one day she will look, and you need to be there when that happens. The stranger's hands moved inside his coat pockets, and Connor's entire body went rigid with tension, every muscle ready to explode into action. But when the hands finally emerged into the light, they were empty, just shaking, trembling, reaching out for something solid to hold on to in a world that had become quicksand. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," the stranger said, his voice breaking apart completely now. "I swear to God I didn't. I don't even know why I came here tonight. I was just walking, and then I was inside, and everyone was looking at me like I was a monster. I just wanted someone to see me, to hear me. For one single moment in my entire miserable life, I wanted to matter to someone." "You matter to Emily," Connor said firmly, "even if she doesn't know how to show it right now. Even if she's scared and confused and angry, you matter to her more than you can possibly understand because you're her father, and nothing can ever change that." The tears were flowing freely down the stranger's face now, and his shoulders began to shake with the force of suppressed sobs that he could no longer contain. His legs seemed to give out beneath him, and Connor moved quickly, catching him before he could hit the floor, guiding him down gently. They ended up kneeling together on the hardwood floor of the restaurant, and Connor put his arms around a complete stranger and held him while the man wept out years of accumulated pain. "My name is Richard," the stranger managed to say between broken sobs. "Richard Holloway. I used to be someone. I used to matter." "You still are someone, Richard. You still matter. That hasn't changed no matter what's happened." Outside the restaurant windows, the distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder. Approaching through the glass, Connor could see the flash of red and blue emergency lights painting the dark street in alternating colors. And in the doorway to the hallway that led to the restrooms, he glimpsed Maylene standing frozen in place, her face pale, watching the entire scene unfold with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. The police officers entered the restaurant with their weapons drawn, professional and cautious, but Connor was already rising to his feet with his hands clearly visible and empty, his voice calm and measured as he explained the situation. No threat here, no weapons involved, just a man in crisis who needed mental health assistance, not handcuffs or jail cells. He advocated for Richard with the practiced clarity of someone who had done this exact thing many times before, who knew exactly which words would resonate with officers trained to see threats everywhere. The officers exchanged glances, recognizing something in Connor's demeanor and expertise, then holstered their weapons. Paramedics arrived minutes later, professional and gentle, helping Richard to his feet and guiding him toward the waiting ambulance with practiced care that maintained his dignity. "Will you tell Emily?" Richard asked, looking back at Connor with red-rimmed, desperate eyes. "Will you tell her I'm trying, that I'm going to get better?" Connor squeezed the man's shoulder firmly. "Someone will reach out to her family, I promise. But you're going to tell her yourself, Richard, when you're ready, when you're better, and you will get better." Richard was loaded into the ambulance, and the vehicle pulled away into the night, with lights flashing, but no siren, disappearing down the street toward whatever help awaited. Connor gave his formal statement to the police and finally stepped outside into the cool October night. The air hit his overheated skin like a blessing, clean and cold. He stood on the empty sidewalk for a long moment, hands on his knees, letting his heart rate settle. His hands were shaking now. They always did. Afterwards, he pulled out his phone and called the babysitter. "Mr. Hale, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Sarah. Is Ivy asleep?" "She went down about 45 minutes ago. She made you a drawing of a horse. She's very proud of it." Connor closed his eyes. Ivy, safe, asleep, waiting for him with a drawing of a horse. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Maylene stopped when she was a few feet away. Her face was completely different than it had been an hour ago. The sharp edges had softened into uncertainty. "I was in the hallway," she said quietly. "I watched most of it." Connor nodded. "You could have been killed. He could have had a gun. You had no idea what he was hiding." "No, I didn't know. But you stayed anyway. You got all those people out." She struggled to articulate something. Connor thought about his wife Sarah, who used to say that real kindness was just courage wearing comfortable shoes. Because someone had to help him, he said finally, and I was there. Maylene was quiet for a long moment. I called you weak, knowing nothing about you. I heard. I was wrong. Her voice was smaller now. I've never been more wrong about anything. Connor turned to look at her. Her face was pale in the streetlight. You didn't know me, he said. You made assumptions. Most people do. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't. I'm sorry, Maylene said. Not because you turned out to be whatever you are, but because I said it at all. I made you small so I could feel bigger. She shook her head. I don't want to be that person anymore. Connor didn't offer absolution. That wasn't his to give. Your daughter, Maylene said. You need to get home. I do. Then go. And thank you. He nodded once, then walked toward his truck. He didn't look back. The next afternoon, Connor was sanding a maple cabinet door when he heard a car in the driveway. He stepped outside to find Maylene holding his jacket. The owner found it this morning, she said. I told him I'd bring it. Connor took the jacket. You didn't have to. I know. She glanced around the property. This is where you live? About 5 years now. After my wife passed. It's peaceful. That's why we chose it. She hesitated. Last night you said crisis response. What did that mean? Connor leaned against the workshop doorframe. 8 years as a community outreach coordinator in Hartford. When someone was in crisis, we got called instead of police. De-escalation, connection. Why did you leave? My wife got sick. She needed me home. After she died, building things felt better. And Ivy needed stability. The screen door banged open. Ivy burst across the yard, launching herself at Connor's legs. Daddy! Connor laughed, swinging her onto his hip. Hey, Jellybean! Ivy studied Maylene. Who are you? Someone your dad met recently. My name is Maylene. Do you like horses? I don't know many horses personally. I draw horses. I could show you. Connor set Ivy down. Maybe another time. Check if Mrs. Patterson needs help with her groceries. Ivy brightened and ran off. Maylene watched her go. She's wonderful, Maylene said quietly. She's the best thing I've ever done. Maylene was quiet. I've spent 15 years climbing, chasing titles. I thought that was strength. She shook her head. Last night, I realized I've never done anything that brave. Connor listened. I don't have anyone who would run across a yard to show me a drawing. Her voice cracked. I don't have anyone who would notice if I wasn't there. That's a hard realization. I don't know how to be different. You start small. You pay attention to people instead of measuring them. It's not complicated, it's just hard. Is that what you did after your wife died? Ivy needed me to be better than my anger, so I learned slowly, imperfectly. Maylene nodded. I should go. Thank you. I hope you find what you're looking for. She drove away. Connor turned toward the house where Ivy waited with a drawing of a winged horse. 2 weeks later, Connor saw Maylene across the street at the hardware store. She was carrying groceries for Mrs. Patterson's sister. The elderly woman was smiling, patting her arm. Connor drove away without approaching. Some transformations were better witnessed from a distance. A month later, her name appeared in the community newsletter. Maylene Frost had joined the Hartford Community Mental Health Alliance, volunteering twice a week, learning to listen. That evening, Connor sat on the back porch with coffee. He thought about Richard Holloway, in treatment now. A letter had arrived thanking him for seeing a person when everyone else saw a threat. Richard was talking to Emily again, just phone calls, but she had agreed to visit. He thought about strength, not flexing muscles or accumulating power. Strength was waking up every morning and choosing to be present. Strength was building things that would outlast you. Strength was loving a child so completely that your own needs became secondary. Strength was looking at a broken man and seeing a mirror. He paused outside Ivy's door, listening to her breathing. The nightlight cast purple shadows across drawings taped everywhere,
horses and houses and stick-figure families. In every picture, two figures held hands, a tall one and a small one. He lay down in darkness and let the day end. Outside, November wind moved through the oak tree, carrying leaves to the waiting earth. And in a small house in Ashford, Connecticut, a single father slept without dreams, at peace with exactly who he